Welcome to episode 2 of Purkey Horror Picture Show. This episode we're going to cover two things from the Rocky Horror Picture Show opening title song, science fiction double feature. So in the opening of that song, we had The Day the Earth Stood Still, which we covered last time. The next movie that is mentioned is actually a serial, but it did play in movie theaters at the time, and that is going to be Flash Gordon. I watched the first episode of Flash Gordon from 1936 called Planet of Peril. After we discussed that for a little bit, then, because we're not going to take too long on it because it's just a 20-minute episode, then we'll discuss the next movie mentioned in that song, and that will be The Invisible Man.
And Flash Gordon was there in silver underwear.
All right, 1936, Flash Gordon. This serial is one of the first serials that would basically play before the main movie when you went to the movie theater. So every week, if you went back, there'd be a new movie, or you could watch the same movie if it played more than one week in a row. But before the movie would be the next episode of whatever serial was playing, and Flash Gordon was one of the most popular serials at that time. Another one you'll hear about is Buck Rogers and also Commander Cody. There's a bunch of different ones, but Flash Gordon was one of the first ones. Very inspirational, especially to things like, you always hear about it when you're talking about movies like Indiana Jones. So all the Indiana Jones movies, some of the sequences in there are based directly off of sequences in serials. The serials would be about 20 minutes long each and just action-packed. So when you look at Flash Gordon, this first episode is a perfect example of what goes on. You've got Mongo, which is the planet that's barreling towards Earth, and it's going to destroy everything on Earth, and everyone's freaking out on Earth. And our main character, Flash Gordon, and Dale Arden is the woman he meets, who's the heroine. Anyway, they're in a plane, and this is a kind of a cool sequence too. They're in a plane, and it's going to crash because the atmosphere is going crazy because the oncoming Mongo planet is causing all this disturbances in the atmosphere and basically going to destroy the Earth. So when their plane is about to go down, everybody in the plane has their own parachute and just jumps out. Okay, great. They jump out and land on the ground and just happen to meet up with a scientist who's got a rocket ship who's going to take them up to the planet that's coming towards them to stop the threat. And this is kind of indicative of how these serials go. They don't really care much about any kind of logic and plot. They don't really develop a lot. It's just action scene, action scene, action scene. So in this first 20 minutes, you meet our main characters. They almost crash in a plane. They get in a rocket ship. The rocket ship flies off to the planet Mongo. They land on the planet Mongo. One of the best things. When they land on the planet Mongo, one of those things you'd see in a lot of old sci-fi movies for dragons or dinosaurs or monsters, they would just get some iguanas, throw a couple iguanas into a little diorama set that looks alien, glue some horns on their heads or whatever to make them look a little more alien, and you'd have lots of slow motion pictures of iguanas opening their mouths, and they'd insert growling or crazy sounds. A lot of cheesy fun. One of the things then after that, they end up going off, getting picked up by another spaceship, taken off to the palace. There on the planet, they meet Ming the Merciless. So if any of you have ever seen the old 70s movie, Flash, you probably, or I think maybe 80s, I don't know, 70s or 1980, I haven't seen it forever. Then you probably recognize these names, Flash Gordon and Ming the Merciless and all this. Of course, there's some problematic racial stereotypes, with Ming the Merciless and some other things in this. But they don't mess around with time and anything. He gets there immediately, he's got to go to battle with some other guys, and then by the end of the episode, he falls into a pit, and what's going to happen? Every episode is a cliffhanger. In fact, I think the term cliffhanger came from serials because every episode, without fail, you want to leave the audiences wondering what's coming next. So at the end of the episode, it'd basically leave with a cliffhanger of some sort, and usually the title of, come back next week to see blank. So for example, I wrote down a couple of the titles So the first one was Planet of Peril, then it goes to the Tunnel of Terror, captured by sharkmen, and then battling the sea beast. And that's just the first 4, and there's like 13 or 14 chapters or episodes of the first round of Flash Gordon, and then it goes on from there. A couple other things that might be kind of interesting on this. A couple other things that are interesting about this. One of the plot points in the early part of this episode, they land on the planet, and then they're about to walk away and go investigate. And Flash, or there's a mad scientist, Flash, and Arden, Dale Arden. I think her name was Dale Arden. Hopefully I'm not wrong about that. And at one point they says, lock the door. So they basically left they lock the rocket ship they're in, like you would lock your car, so no one can get into it. And that becomes a plot point because when the dragon iguana things come out and start attacking, they run back to the ship and it's locked. They can't get in because they don't have the key.
It's locked. I'll get it open. Keep an eye out, Dale.
That's kind of a weird thing, very dated but interesting. Another couple things that are kind of interesting anachronisms: the way they imagined the aliens or the soldiers of Ming, is they had basically suits of armor as kind of their space suits, which is kind of an odd look when you're thinking about how space suits kind of look now. People, astronauts or whatever, that you don't think of them wearing armor, but they did then. And the last thing I really noticed was when they're in their spaceship and their rocket ship, a lot of the machinery they use, the prop machinery on the walls that they use, have levers and dials and all this kind of cool old school sci-fi stuff, very reminiscent of what you see in the lab of Frankenfurter in Rocky Horror Picture Show. So I'm thinking that, along with obviously the look of Rocky, basically were influenced by the Flash Gordon series. All right, with that, how would I rate it? It's really fun to watch. I mean, you could watch a couple episodes or a couple chapters really quickly because it never stops the action, and it's very fun and campy. I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way too far for it, but you can go on YouTube and find just about all of them. So if you're interested or curious, I would suggest watch a couple episodes. I'd give them like a 3 out of 5. I mean, they're fun and cheesy, but I mean, they're not great, you know. Okay, coming up next, the main event. So I guess that would have been our serial before the main event, and our main event is going to be The Invisible Man.
Claude Rains was the Invisible Man.
So The Invisible Man is from 1933. It is a Universal Monster core film. So you think of Universal Monsters, you think of Frankenstein and Dracula, the Mummy, the Wolfman. I think they usually include Creature from the Black Lagoon, although he's kind of later. And then The Invisible Man. Now, The Invisible Man is directed by James Whale, and James Whale is the one who very famously did Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. And you can see, especially in the photography and the set pieces and the design, it has that really lush black and white look of that period. Amazing sets. This one isn't quite as fantastic as the two Frankenstein movies, the first two Frankenstein movies, in that it doesn't have these laboratories and castles and all these cool things to look at. Although there are a few scenes in here where you get to kind of see James Whale showing that awesome kind of old set piece look, and he does a couple things. In the beginning, there's a scene where he's walking through the snow, and there's a couple other scenes where you kind of really get that feel. The main appeal of the Invisible Man is it's unusual for the monsters of that era. Almost all the monsters of that era are misunderstood creatures. You know, you've got Frankenstein, who was brought back to life by no fault of his own and has a damaged brain, and he's really that, you know, he wants to just be understood, and of course he can't, and he lashes out and all that kind of stuff. But he's not really intentionally a bad guy. And you kind of get the same thing with a lot of those famous old monsters. They're not evil by nature. They're misunderstood and then eventually pushed into some sort of a corner. They have some kind of innate issue that causes them to lash out or react incorrectly that ends up hurting people or having people get scared of them. You definitely see that later when we talk about King Kong. Dracula's an exception. He's kind of an evil supernatural creature. The Wolfman, once again, is turned into a Wolfman. Dracula's the same way in a sense, although you never see it. They're turned into that creature by some other circumstance. But the Wolfman is definitely another one. He's a cursed kind of figure, and he, doesn't want to have happen what happens. On the other hand, the Invisible Man the monster is the mad scientist. So the mad scientist creates the serum that causes him to go invisible. And one thing so look at this movie. Parts of it are really entertaining, and parts of it are kind of that old school melodramatic relationship stuff that isn't so fun. But the first third is definitely lots of fun. Mysterious guy all wrapped up, and he shows up in a tavern called the Lion's Head Tavern. Once again, I think there's an homage to that. If you look at the tavern in American Werewolf in London, which is called the Slaughtered Lamb. Instead of the Lion's Head, you got the Slaughtered Lamb. And then the idea that you got these kind of country, crusty denizens in both of those taverns, in American Werewolf and in this movie. So anyway, you've got this kind of the stranger coming from nowhere into this tavern, and he ends up living there for a while, and he's doing his experiments to try to figure out how to undo the invisibility. And it takes a while for it to be revealed that he's invisible. And while he's there, there's tons of cool little shenanigans. And the overacting by both Claude Rains and by all of the people in the tavern are lots of fun, lots of scenery chewing. And I want to make a special note. My favorite character in this whole movie is Jenny, who is an older wife of the tavern owner, played by Una O'Connor. She overacts incredibly, but it's so awesome the way she just is magnetic. And she plays the character that is parodied in Young Frankenstein as Frau Blücher.
I am Frau Blücher.
So if you know, everyone saying Young Frankenstein remembers Frau Blücher.
May I present Frau Blücher?
Well, this actress played that character essentially in the Frankenstein movie, and she plays a similarly over-the-top character in this tavern as Jenny. And there's a couple scenes where she just loses her mind because the invisible guy is doing everything crazy, and it's a ton of fun to watch her do her thing. I'm not going to go a lot into the overall plot. I mean, it's kind of in three parts. The first part is the stranger coming into the tavern and eventually getting discovered he's invisible and getting away from there. The second third is essentially him revealing his, evil plot to the world and to his former colleagues and his, I guess, fiance. Anyway. And that part is probably the least interesting. The middle part is probably the least interesting. And then the third part is kind of like, how are they going to catch him? How are you going to get an invisible guy? And that's kind of fun to see how they tried to come up with different techniques to catch the Invisible Man and what worked and what didn't work. And there's a couple little twists there that are a lot of fun again. So I would say, it's only about an hour and 10 minutes or so. You can find it free on various streaming places. I think I got mine off Vimeo, but you can find it in various places. Definitely worth a watch. You could kind of fast forward a little bit through the middle part. And I'd say, if The Day the Earth Stood Still for me was about a 4-star, if this one's about a 3.5 star for me, you definitely should go back and watch all these Universal monster movies. I would say go back and check out the 2 first Frankensteins before I would watch this one. But once you've watched those, you can watch this one and kind of see what they were doing, what James Whale was doing, after those movies. But those first 2, if you've never seen them, they live up to the hype. They are so good. Anyway, we will be back soon, and our next movie is one of the only 2 movies from this series where I actually bought the physical DVD because it's that good, and that is King Kong. I would expect to see me watching King Kong by the 6th or 7th, and a review around that time. So if you've never watched the original King Kong, I would highly, highly recommend it. For me, it's a 5-star movie. It's a must-see to understand anything about blockbuster movie making, special effects movie making, or the history of just monsters in cinema. King Kong is a must. Checking in later. Bye.